And welcome back, guys and gals. If you want to follow along with what is happening on screen, you can open up the file called section 3 part 2. It's basically the same file we had in the previous part with all the primitives in our scene. So now I want to actually start moving these guys around and maybe build something very primitive using what I have. So I want to do modeling. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go change my workspace to modeling standard so that Maya hides some stuff that I do not need in this viewport, as well as I want to go in and turn on my grid. Now, as you guys can recall from a previous lesson, if you hold down Alt and left click, you can orbit, middle click, you can pan or track, and then right click is the dolly. And remember, I'm holding down Alt while doing all of this. So Maya works on a real world scale. So 1 unit equals 1, say, meter or centimeter, depending on what you set it to. So if we want to go and see what Maya has to offer, if we want to go and see what Maya is currently set to, we will navigate to Windows, Settings and Preferences, and then in here, we're going to go to UI element. In here, we will go to Settings. With preferences open, we will jump into Settings, and then you can see our Maya is currently set to centimeters. You can work in meters, inches, feet, yards, and so forth, but I prefer working in centimeters. If your production pipeline requires you to change the unit that you work in, this is the place you would do it. I'm going to click Save, so it closes that window. So now I know every 1 unit in Maya equals 1 centimeter. What I like to do is I normally work in a scale of a 6-foot person so that I can build my scenes around, and a 6-foot person is 180 centimeters tall. Okay, 6'2", if I'm not mistaken, is 182 centimeters tall, but I stand corrected. So for interest's sake, I'm going to go in and create another cube for myself. I'm going to go to Create, Polygons Cube. I'm going to click on this little square next to the word cube because this will open up the options dialog for my cube. So click that, and now we're greeted with that. So I'm going to go change my height from 1 unit to 180 units. I'm going to click Apply. Now, if I use my scroll wheel and scroll back, you can see it's a very tall cube, which is actually called a rectangle to be technical. So as you can see, the default sizes of the primitives are very small in relationship to a 6-foot person. So now if I want to use primitives and get them in places and have them to correct scale, we need to be able to move them around, change their scales, and as well as rotate them. So that's what this lesson is all about. So if I go dolly back into these doohickeys at the bottom here, I select the cube. As you can see, currently it's set to my move mode. If I press Q on my keyboard, that is a shortcut key to go into my selection tool. So here I can just select, and I'm not bogged down by the little arrows that pop up. So if I press W on my keyboard, that enables the move tool. As you can see, move tool on the side here. From this, we've got access to 2 translation tools, which is the rotate tool. By pressing E on your keyboard, you'll see our rotating gizmo pop up, and then R for our scale tool. My advice is get used to the shortcut keys rather than relying on moving your mouse towards the toolbar and clicking on them. Even though they do give you the same results, it's time that you're wasting. It's like 2 seconds, like taking a second to come here and then a second to come back, and so on and so forth. And every second you can save, the better for you. So again, my move tool is W, E is for rotate, and R is for scale. And then Q is just for selection, which turns off my gizmo. The gizmo is the arrows and the circles and the little blocks that you see on your selected object. That is referred to as your gizmo. You can also change the size of your gizmo depending on your screen size, your screen real estate, as well as personal preference. If you press the plus and minus key on your keyboard, you'll see if I press the plus key, the gizmo becomes bigger. If I press the minus key, the gizmo becomes smaller. You'll see the gizmo size. If I make it very big, it's big on all of them. Okay, if I make it very small, All of them are small. I tend to have them a little bit bigger than the objects I work with because it just makes it a lot easier to select. So now I'm moving objects around. So now that I know what these cool little gizmo symbols are, let's start looking at what they do for us. So I'm going to just go and come closer by using my mouse, using my dollying and tracking and all that good stuff. As you can see now, this gizmo looks like it's changed size, but it's just in relationship to this object. If I want to make it bigger again, I can, but here it's fine this size. So when you have the gizmo enabled, you'll also see there's 3 different arrows. These arrows correspond to the Cartesian plane that we work in within the 3D space, your X, Y, and Z axes, as well as planes. This flat surface here, you could imagine is your, if we go look at this grid here, so this grid, flat grid, is our XY plane. The grid behind, if you had to imagine a grid behind there, is our YX plane, and then from this angle, we'll see a ZY plane. So with these gizmos, it's pretty interesting. You can move in one axis only. So yeah, I'm moving my shape backwards and forwards in the Z translation. Then here, the X left and right, and then of course Y up and down. But now if you want to move quickly, say for example, I know I want to move this guy in the XY plane, I will just grab this little square here and it'll move in that plane. As you can see, it doesn't go backwards or forwards, it just moves in that area. It doesn't matter how I move my mouse, it'll only go left to right and up and down. If I grab this guy, it can now go backwards and left and right. And then last but not least, if you're very confident, you can grab the center here and then you move on all 3 axes. So based on my camera, the object moves perpendicular to my camera. As you can see, I can just do that and grab that center guy and then go down here. It all depends on how I'm looking at my object, because as you can see, the center cube is always facing the camera. So depending on my view of this object, will move perpendicular to my camera. So I can move here, I can either move perpendicular or I can grab my Z and just move it in Z, then the X, then the Y, and maybe back in my Z. As you can see now, it's below the grid, and then I can bring it back above the grid. Now if I go to my rotate tool, here I'm going to make this guy a tad bigger so we can look at what we have. You'll see the same 3 axes. We've got our blue, which is our Z, we've got our red, which is our X, and then we got our green, which is our Y. So again, we won't really see on the sphere, so let's go do it on this cube. I can rotate in the Z or in the X or in the Y. And as you can see, this gizmo changes and stays in the same angle as the object, whereas the move tool stays equal to our global 0 point. With other words, as you can see, my Z is perpendicular to the Z here, X, X, Y, up and down. Where the rotation, the gizmo is changing and remembering its rotation relative to the world origin. The world origin is this center point that we have. Let me just mosey on this cubey out of the way. So our world origin is this 0, 0 point. So our rotation gizmo relative to the 0, 0 will change the way it's orientated. We can change it later on when we start customizing or changing settings of our tools, but that we will cover in a later lesson. Now if I go press R for scale, you'll see the scale is also being rotated relative to our origin, which helps us kind of a bit, because now I can go grab my Y and I can go scale this guy out to get this cube to be a rectangle shape. I can also go make it flat, and then I can go back to my rotation, and then I can go rotate this guy, maybe something like this, and then I can go back to scale. And again, if I go and grab this square, it'll scale it in the X and Z. So you'll see that it scales it in 2 different axes. Same with this blue one here. You can see it scales it in 2 different axes. Last but not least, that guy. Now on the rotation tool, you have another 2 ways of rotating objects. Firstly, we have just rotating directly on the axes. But if we grab and there's anywhere in these open sections, we will freely rotate the object in all 3 axes. As you can see, I can put it into any angle, but this is something you need to practice and get used to. So we'll do that, and maybe this, and maybe I can do that. Maybe I just just want to smoosh on like that and then carry on doing this. Now you see this outer turquoise ring we have around our rotation gizmo. This ring rotates the object based on our camera view. It's the same as the center of our move tool. This guy, depending on our angle of view of our camera, it will rotate the object in that way. And then last but not least, the scale tool has the same option. As you can see, there's a turquoise cube in the bottom here. This will scale it up or down depending on how you move your mouse in all three axes. So each gizmo has an option to move it in all of the axes at once, or something that is perpendicular to the camera, or in a specific axis depending on axes you actually grab on the gizmo. So now to be busy moving around and we kind of get the idea of moving our objects into place and all that good stuff. So say for example, when I get this guy here, rotate it and move this guy here, move it there and all that good stuff, you might get lost in your scene in the sense of you by accidentally move too far or something like that. Like you totally don't know where you are. Like here we're in the big void of 3D. If you press A on your keyboard, it will bring in everything currently in your scene into view. As you can see, it brings in everything into view. Now I just need to orbit around so that I can look back down onto my scene and just reorientate myself so my Z is pointing forward if I look in the bottom left hand on the screen here. Another way is if you want to specifically focus on a specific object, you need the object selected. If I press F, now I'm focused on this guy. But when we do that, now the camera will orbit around the object we focused on. Even if we do select something else, you'll see the camera is focused still on the cylinder that we selected. If I want to change focus to the torus, I press F, and then now we're focusing on the torus. If I have multiple objects selected by pressing down our shift key and then left clicking on objects and then pressing F, it'll place the camera's focal point in the center of the object that we have selected. So for example, now I do with the marquee select all of these and press F, you can see the camera puts the focus somewhere in the origin here so that the camera can orbit around and keep these objects relatively in view. If you want to have your camera snap back to having the origin as its rotation point, if we press A, you'll see the camera now orbits around in relationship to the world origin. So again, if I ever get lost, I can press A to bring everything back into view. If I have something selected and get lost, I can press F to bring that specific object into view. So F is for focus, A is for all. If I now jump into my orthographic views, you can see my objects are here. I can now do the same stuff in here. So for example, I grab my torus. As you can see, my move tool is here. But as you can see, I can only move in two axes in this instance. I didn't select my torus. I select my disk there. So let me select my torus in my perspective view. Move this guy. Press E for rotation. Rotate this guy like that. Maybe I want it bigger. So R for scale. And then if I go into this view, I can move it around and so on and so forth. Now, if I want to focus on this torus on all four of my views, I hold down shift and tap the F key. You'll see my viewport shift so that my torus is now our focal point in all the views. If I want to be able to view everything in my scene in all four of my views, I go shift A. You'll see the camera move and dolly so that everything in my scene is now visible in all four of my viewports. I just want to have the bottom guy selected. I do a marquee selection over everything. I hold down control to be able to deselect objects. So I just click on the object I don't want selected, which is this tall guy. And then I'm going to go shift F. It dollies the camera closest so that the selected objects are now my focal point. Again, I can move around in my orthographics as I wish. I can maximize them, dolly out, grab another primitive here, and then maybe rotate it, and then maybe scale it, and so forth. So this is how we start moving our objects around in 3D space to start blocking out a concept or an idea. With that said, I would like you guys to play around, create more primitives, move them around, and just get lost try and get this soccer ball into a torus like so, like you're trying to score a goal. I don't know, make something fun. Literally, your imagination is your only limit when it comes to blocking out a concept. While you're blocking out concepts, don't worry about if your objects intersect with one another. All we care about is the idea. Having a clean piece of geometry at this point is not important, guys, at all. The idea is always the first thing that we need to worry about. Now my torus has a goatee. Look at that. It's got a goatee and a single eyeball, so technically a cyclops. So with that said, I will catch you in the next lesson.